All right. So what I'm working on here is arpeggiation. I really like to use, every now and then, I use arpeggiation, probably too much, but it's one of the formative sounds that really hooked me into digital music in the first place, was the sound of a really clever arpeggiator, and that someone had created an arpeggiated sound that on repetition, bless up, that on repetition simply became hypnotic and captivating. And I got sort of hooked on this for a while. And the thing is, here's something for all you young musicians out there and young music creators. If you, God willing and God bless you, you live a long life, pretty long. What happens is that you accumulate the decades in between and they all become formative. In my case, I've got music from the 1950s that I heard as a child from my mother singing while she was doing housework and singing to the radio. And I was so used to that music. Then it flipped, and in the 1960s the music changed and flower power became a big thing. So I was listening to that, of course, and we get Tamla Motown, and we get the Supremes and Stevie Wonder bursting through with a new, really bright, happy, up-tempo sound that was driving everyone crazy. And that, of course, in the end became, Prince and Michael Jackson and everybody else. But at that time, in the 1960s, I remember when it first started coming out, and you first started hearing Diana Ross and the Supremes, it was mind-blowing. It was so beautiful and so well-produced and so on. Then you got Stevie Wonder and so on breaking through with a completely new sound. So you get the 1960s, we get, I had the 50s and the 60s, then we get the 70s, and it's a decade of rebellion and so on that leads into the 1980s, and we get a crossover of punk, and we get Greed is Good, and we get a lot of bright, happy, big hair music in the 1980s, but at the same time running through that was the beginning of house. And so by the 1990s, you've got something, when these were all starting to fade in one way or another, or had found their niche, you get, at that time, I'm just going to turn this down a bit for myself. What you get after that is house music in the 90s starting to come up in a rave movement that began, which really did believe if we all get together and peaceably, happily, with the same good intention, and listen to music and dance, the world can be saved. And it was love is the answer, love is the message, and so on. So if you live long enough, each one of those things is accumulated in your kind of backpack of sounds that you've been exposed to, and that you blend into what you do. So arpeggiation became a big thing for me from the 80s and Giorgio Moroder. When I first heard Giorgio Moroder and so on, and Cat People, and that particular sound that he used, using synthesizers, using Moog sounds that had been for fun, and then suddenly became the vital central instrument. And it was so reminiscent of Indian music and so on, at the same time, with a drone string on a sitar being played. No matter what else you play, there's a drone string being played, keeping that sound. And I was picking this up with Giorgio Moroder and got into it. So over the years, I've played with arpeggiation. And in this track, what I'm doing is putting together a bunch of, it's only made with arpeggiation. I've got a tiny little beat up here you can see in blues. So what I'm doing here is putting together, now if I just shrink this up a bit, you can start to see what's happening with a kind of geography and a kind of topography and a kind of design. You get a look of this thing. So what I've got is each time I'm introducing a new arpeggiated track and only using arpeggiation, and I get to a certain point where I just reduce them again and bring them back, drop it right down. Now what would normally happen when you're doing a big drop down like this is that you might compensate using, for instance, you might just compensate by using some kind of automation. And at this particular point you think, well, this is dropped down so low, it's hardly audible, I might just raise this up a bit. In this case, I didn't do any of the automate. The mixers and engineers who work with me will tell you, when they open up sometimes, it looks like a cardiac arrest diagram, because there's so much automation, which I'll tend to do sometimes. But in this, I let it drop down, let it get, and have the feeling that maybe it's over, because the volume has dropped down so low. Just pick it up a bit so you can hear it. And that's in the room here. So I let it drop down to a natural low, that seems like it's going to stop. And then changing the structure a bit, I brought these in at the same time to just give it the sense, oh, we're not over yet. Just coming in now. Oh, so we're sort of back in. It wasn't the end. No, it ain't. And as we get into this, you'll see sometimes when you create a structure, like, and you like it, and you say, oh, this is working well and I like the architecture of it, you may find that one track you put in there is better to come in a little later, and it comes in as an accentuating track. So that's what I've got here. In this track, which you can see, I've muted it in sections, and it should have come in, theoretically, and it did originally come in here. But I've delayed it, and I've delayed it here as well. So you can see other tracks are coming in with the arpeggiator. And one by one, it's adding to the sound until it gets to a kind of crescendo. But each time, trying to lay in, so here's a new sound coming in right now. We solo that. And then we just put that back in. To me, it had a natural feel. It sat in there nicely. And this next one, I'll put this in there because what I want to do is subtly change the chord structure so that to prepare for the new instruments that are coming in with a slight change in the melody. So if we have that, and we have a new one. And this is the new structure that I'm coming in with, a different, slightly different chord structure and a different pace. And I'm once again only using arpeggiation and arpeggiated instruments. Each time trying to add a layer that makes sense on top of the other layers. Little layer, but in there it has its place.